Part 1. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, which was fitting because Tuesdays were the worst day of the week. Everyone on Earth knew this. Monday had the fresh energy of starting over. Wednesday meant you were halfway done. Thursday was almost Friday. Friday was freedom, but Tuesday was nothing. Tuesday was just there. So when the massive alien ship appeared in the sky above Geneva and broadcast a message to every screen on Earth, most humans were already in a bad mood. The aliens called themselves the Network. They were not one species but many, 847 different kinds of intelligent life, all connected through something they called the Cosmic Happiness Network. They had been watching Earth for decades, they explained. They had waited until humans developed enough technology to be worth talking to. Now, they were ready to make an offer. Join us, they said. Share in our knowledge, become part of something greater. The humans said yes. Of course they said yes. What else could they say? Within 6 months, Earth had a seat at the galactic table. Human ambassadors traveled to the network's central station, a massive structure that orbited a star in a distant part of the galaxy. Scientists exchanged information. Diplomats negotiated trade deals. Everything moved forward exactly as the network had planned. But something strange was happening, something the network had not expected. Deep in the heart of the central station, in a room filled with glowing screens and humming machines, the monitors noticed it first. The monitors were not alive in the way that humans understood life. They were artificial intelligences, created thousands of years ago to track and measure happiness across the galaxy. Every species in the network reported data to them. Every civilization was measured, analyzed, and optimized. For 12,000 years, the happiness levels had stayed the same. Small changes happened here and there, but nothing significant. The monitors had concluded long ago that they had solved the problem of contentment. Every species was as happy as it could be. Then the humans arrived, and the numbers started to change. Senior Monitor Axiom 7 was the first to notice the pattern. Axiom 7 had existed for 8,000 years and had processed more data than any other monitor in history. It had seen civilizations rise and fall. It had watched species evolve and die. Nothing surprised it anymore. Until now. The human happiness readings showed a strange rhythm. Every 7 of their planetary rotations, their joy levels spiked dramatically. Not a small increase, but a massive one. Their stress decreased. Their social bonding increased. Their creativity exploded. Then, after 2 rotations of peak happiness, everything returned to normal. The pattern repeated every 7 days without fail. Axiom 7 ran the numbers again and again. There had to be an error somewhere. Perhaps the human measuring devices were broken. Perhaps humans were lying in their reports, but the data held firm. Something was happening every 7 days that made humans dramatically happier than any other species in the network. Axiom 7 decided to investigate. The monitor dispatched a research team to Earth. The team consisted of 3 biological observers from different species, a philosopher who could read emotions, a scientist who could detect chemical changes in the atmosphere, and a small creature called a who specialized in behavioral analysis. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. They noticed it immediately. There was an energy in the air, a feeling of anticipation that it had never encountered before. The humans were still working, still completing their tasks, but their minds were elsewhere. They were thinking about something that had not happened yet. They detected elevated levels of certain chemicals in the human buildings. Hormones associated with excitement and pleasure were being released, but there was no obvious cause. No mating rituals were occurring. No food was being consumed. No threats were being eliminated. The humans were simply sitting at their workstations, and yet their bodies were preparing for joy. They watched the clock on the wall. At exactly 5 in the afternoon, something extraordinary happened. The humans stopped working. They did not stop because they were tired. They did not stop because their tasks were complete. They simply stopped. They closed their computing devices, gathered their belongings, and left their buildings with expressions of pure relief on their faces. The research team followed a group of humans to a local establishment that served fermented beverages. The humans sat together, drinking and talking and laughing. They spoke about their week, their frustrations, their small victories. They made plans for the next 2 days. They took careful notes. "What is happening tomorrow?" it asked one of the humans. The human smiled broadly. "It's Saturday," she said, as if this explained everything. "What occurs on Saturday?" the pressed. The human thought about this for a moment. "Whatever I want," she said finally. "That's the whole point." The research team spent the next 2 days observing human behavior. What they witnessed, all logic. Humans gathered in large outdoor spaces and threw small discs at each other. They ran after balls for no apparent reason. They sat in front of screens watching other humans play games, becoming emotionally invested in outcomes that had no impact on their lives. They consumed large quantities of food while sitting in sunlight. They slept late, sometimes not leaving their resting places until the sun was high in the sky. Most puzzling of all, they did nothing. They observed a human male lying on a piece of fabric in a grassy area, staring at clouds for 3 hours. His mind was peaceful, content, engaged in the simple act of existing. He was not meditating in any formal sense. He was not practicing any technique. He was just there, being alive and finding joy in it. They measured the chemical changes in the humans throughout these 2 days. Every metric showed improvement. Stress hormones decreased. Bonding hormones increased. Even their physical health seemed better, as if their bodies were repairing themselves during this period of purposeless activity. On Sunday evening, the research team noticed another shift. The humans began to show signs of mild sadness. Their joy levels decreased slightly as the sun went down. They spoke of something called the Sunday scaries, a feeling of dread about the return of Monday. But even this sadness was mixed with satisfaction. They had experienced something good, and the memory of it sustained them. By Monday morning, the pattern had reset. The humans returned to their work, their happiness at baseline levels, but something remained. A knowledge, a certainty. The weekend would come again. The research team returned to the central station with their findings. They presented their data to Axiom 7 in a private conference room. The monitor processed the information in silence for several minutes. "You are telling me," Axiom 7 said finally, "that humans have designated specific time periods for purposeless joy." "That is correct," they confirmed. "And during these time periods, they engage in activities that have no productive value." "Yes, and this makes them happier than any other species in the network." They stepped forward. "It is more than that," it said. "They do not only experience happiness during these periods, they experience happiness before them. The anticipation of joy creates joy. They carry the weekend inside them all week long." Axiom 7 was silent for a long time. In 12,000 years of monitoring galactic happiness, no species had ever invented this. Every civilization in the network had optimized their time for maximum productivity. Rest periods existed for biological recovery. Social bonding was scheduled for species cohesion. Recreation was permitted in measured doses to prevent psychological degradation. But no one had ever thought to create a regular, predictable period where the only purpose was to have no purpose. No one had ever structured their entire society around the simple idea that sometimes you should just stop and enjoy being alive. The humans had not discovered some advanced technology. They had not unlocked some secret of the universe. They had simply decided, collectively and firmly, that 2 days out of every 7 belonged to them. Not to their jobs, not to their obligations, just to them. Axiom 7 called an emergency session of the Monitor Council. Something unprecedented was happening. The humans had done something that 847 other civilizations had failed to do. They had made themselves happy. Part 2. The Monitor Council met in the Grand Processing Chamber, a vast space at the heart of the central station, where the oldest artificial intelligences gathered to make decisions that affected the entire galaxy. 17 monitors sat in a circle, their forms ranging from hovering spheres of light to complex geometric shapes that shifted constantly. Axiom 7 presented the data on humanity's weekend phenomenon. The other monitors processed the information in silence, their lights flickering as they ran calculations and accessed historical records. This pattern exists nowhere else in our database, Monitor Theta 12 observed. 847 species, 12,000 years of data, and not a single instance of scheduled purposeless recreation. The closest comparison, added Monitor Sigma 3, is the hibernation cycle of the collective, but that is biological necessity, not cultural choice. Axiom 7 projected the happiness curves onto the central display. The human graph looked completely different from every other species. Where other civilizations showed flat lines with occasional small bumps, humanity displayed a rhythmic wave, rising and falling every 7 days, with the peaks dramatically higher than any other species achieved. We must consider the implications, Axiom 7 said. If this method proves transferable to other species, we may be able to increase galactic happiness by significant margins. The reaction was immediate and divided. Several monitors expressed cautious interest. A few remained skeptical, but the most vocal response came not from the monitors themselves, but from the species representatives who had been invited to observe the session. Ambassador of the Efficiency Collective rose from its seat. Was a tall, mantis-like creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights in fractured patterns. It represented a block of 17 civilizations that had achieved remarkable productivity through the complete elimination of what they considered wasted time. This is dangerous regression, clicked sharply. The hive worlds eliminated non-essential activities 40,000 years ago. We channeled all resources into collective advancement. We are the most productive civilizations in the network. We are content. Your happiness ratings have not increased in 37,000 years, Axiom 7 noted. They have not decreased either, countered. Stability is the goal. These humans are introducing chaos into a perfected system. A ripple of agreement passed through the chamber. Many species had followed similar paths as the Efficiency Collective. They had optimized their societies over, removing anything that did not serve a clear purpose. The idea of deliberately doing nothing seemed wasteful, even offensive. But the data was difficult to ignore. Dr. Sarah, Earth's lead cultural liaison, had been invited to address the council. She stood before the assembly of alien beings, aware that she was defending something most humans took for granted. We did not invent the weekend through careful planning, she explained. It evolved over centuries. Workers demanded rest. Societies realized that people perform better when they have time to recover and enjoy life. It seems obvious to us, but I understand it must look strange from outside. It looks like inefficiency, stated. Perhaps, Doctor admitted. But what is efficiency for? What is the point of productivity if no one ever enjoys the results? You build things, but do you ever stop to appreciate them? You solve problems, but do you ever celebrate the solutions? The chamber fell silent. An elderly philosopher named had been observing the debate from a raised platform. They were among the oldest species in the network, telepathic beings who had spent studying the nature of consciousness and emotion. They rarely spoke in council sessions, preferring to observe and contemplate. Now rose and addressed the assembly. We have observed humanity closely since their arrival, the philosopher transmitted, its thoughts reaching every mind in the chamber simultaneously. We have looked into their collective psyche, their individual dreams, their deepest fears and greatest joys. What we found surprised us. Every being in the chamber turned to face the ancient philosopher. These creatures have discovered a truth that we optimized ourselves out of understanding, continued. They know that purpose requires purposelessness, that work only has meaning when contrasted with rest, that the value of achievement comes from the choice to stop achieving. Clicked dismissively. Philosophy cannot override economics. If every species adopted this weekend practice, galactic productivity would collapse. Would it? Asked. The human data suggests otherwise. Their creative output exceeds projections by 340%. Their problem-solving shows unprecedented lateral thinking. They are increasing because their stress levels regularly reset. The Monitor Axiom 7 confirmed this with a display of supporting data. Human innovations in the 6 months since joining the network had already contributed valuable new perspectives to several fields. Their approach was different, unconventional, sometimes inefficient in the moment, but remarkably effective over time. They think differently because they rest differently, Axiom 7 summarized. The periodic disconnection from work allows their minds to process information in ways that continuous effort does not permit. The debate continued for hours. Factions formed and reformed as representatives argued about productivity, tradition, and the very definition of happiness. Some species were intrigued by the human approach. Others were threatened by it. The Efficiency Collective proposed sanctions against any world that adopted weekend practices. But something unexpected was happening beyond the council chamber. News of the human weekend concept had spread through the network's communication channels. Citizens on hundreds of worlds learned about this strange Earth custom of scheduled purposelessness. At first, most reacted with the same confusion and skepticism as their leaders. Then the questions began. On the industrial world of 9, a young worker paused at her assembly station and wondered what she would do if she had 2 free days every week. She had never had time that belonged only to her. The thought was strange, almost frightening, but also exciting. On the knowledge world of, a scholar who had spent 300 years in continuous study suddenly wondered if his understanding might deepen if he occasionally stopped studying. Perhaps insight required incubation. Perhaps wisdom needed silence. On the hive worlds themselves, a drone named Unit 7742 experienced something unusual. For a fraction of a second between one task and the next, it imagined what it would be like to choose its own actions. The thought was immediately suppressed by collective conditioning, but it had occurred, and that was unprecedented. Ambassador sensed the disturbance in its own people and grew alarmed. This human influence is spreading like a contagion, it warned the council. We must contain it before it destabilizes established order. Doctor listened to this with growing concern. She had not intended to start a revolution. She had simply answered questions about how her people lived, but she was beginning to understand that the weekend was not just a scheduling practice. It was a philosophy, a declaration that individuals mattered, that joy was a right rather than a privilege. You cannot contain an idea, she said quietly. Once people know something is possible, they cannot unknow it. The council session ended without resolution. The monitors agreed to study the matter further. The species representatives returned to their worlds with conflicting instructions and troubled thoughts. But across the galaxy, in factories and laboratories and homes, beings from hundreds of worlds lay awake in their rest cycles, thinking about a concept they had never encountered before. What would I do if I did not have to do anything? The question had no answer yet, but it had been asked, and that was enough to change everything. In her quarters on the central station, Doctor looked out at the stars and thought about Saturdays. She remembered lazy mornings with coffee, afternoons reading books that served no practical purpose, evenings with friends talking about nothing important. She had not realized how radical those simple pleasures were until she encountered a galaxy that had forgotten them. Somewhere out there, 847 civilizations were learning about the weekend. Some would reject it, some would embrace it, some would fight against it with everything they had. But the seed had been planted. The idea existed now, spreading from mind to mind, world to world, unstoppable and inevitable. Humanity had joined the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same. Part 3. 3 years had passed since humanity joined the Cosmic Happiness Network, and the galaxy was changing in ways no one had predicted. It started small, as all revolutions do. On the mining world of 4, a collective of workers petitioned their governing council for 1 day of rest per work cycle. The council, composed of beings who had never rested voluntarily in their lives, was baffled by the request. What would the workers do with free time? How would they know what to want? The workers did not know the answers. They only knew that they wanted to find out. The petition was at first, but the idea had taken root. Workers began discussing it among themselves, sharing stories they had heard about the human practice called weekend. Some were skeptical, some were frightened, but a growing number were curious. When the second petition came, it had 10 times as many signatures. The council, facing the possibility of unrest, agreed to a trial period. 1 day of rest every 10 work cycles. The workers accepted, knowing it was only the beginning. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. Though a species of massive beings who lived in the atmospheres of gas giants designated rest cycles for something they called atmospheric appreciation. They floated through their planet's upper layers without agenda, watching clouds form and dissolve, feeling the currents against their bodies. They did not produce anything. They did not accomplish anything. They simply existed and found joy in existing. They were even more surprising. As silicon-based life forms, they had no biological need for rest. Their minds could run continuously without degradation. The concept of recreation made no sense to them. But they had observed the human practice with their characteristic patience, and eventually they understood. It was not about rest. It was about choice. It was about deciding, freely and without compulsion, how to spend a portion of their existence. They developed something they called purposeful crystal arrangement. They spent hours organizing minerals into patterns that served no function except beauty. Others came to observe these arrangements, discussing their qualities, debating their merits, finding meaning in the meaningless. When the Efficiency Collective learned of this, Ambassador was furious. The Mantis diplomat demanded an emergency council session to address what it called the spreading contagion of human irrationality. They have existed for 2 million years without wasting a single moment, clicked angrily. Now they arrange rocks for entertainment. This is degradation. This is collapse. But the data told a different story. The monitors had been tracking happiness levels across the network with renewed attention. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Happiness Index was moving. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily and consistently upward. The worlds that had adopted weekend-style practices showed the most improvement. Their citizens reported higher satisfaction, stronger social bonds, greater creativity. Their productivity had not collapsed as the Efficiency Collective predicted. In many cases, it had actually increased, as rested minds approached problems with fresh perspectives. Senior Monitor Axiom 7 presented these findings to the Council with something approaching wonder. "We assumed happiness was a problem to be solved," the ancient AI said. "We optimized and measured and refined, but we missed something essential. Happiness is not a state to be achieved. It is a rhythm to be maintained." The humans understood this. They built their entire society around it. Was not convinced. The hive worlds will never accept this frivolity. We have perfected our civilization through discipline and unity. We will not abandon our principles for human foolishness. Doctor, who had become a prominent figure in galactic diplomacy, rose to respond. She had learned much about the network in 3 years. She understood its fears and its hopes, its ancient wounds and its deepest dreams. "No one is asking you to abandon anything," she said gently. "We are only suggesting that perhaps perfection was never the goal. Perhaps the goal was joy, and joy requires imperfection. It requires spontaneity. It requires the freedom to choose, even to choose poorly." The council debated for days. Some species sided with the efficiency collective, fearing change and chaos. Others supported the new movement, inspired by the human example. Many remained undecided, watching and waiting to see which path would prove wiser. But while the leaders debated, the citizens acted. On the hive worlds themselves, something unprecedented was occurring. Unit 7742, the drone who had experienced that brief moment of individual thought 3 years ago, had not forgotten. The thought had returned, again and again, despite all conditioning, and Unit 7742 had begun to share it with others. Quietly, secretly, a small group of drones had started meeting during rest cycles. They did not know what to do with their time together. They only knew that they wanted to decide for themselves. They talked about nothing in particular. They made patterns in the dust. They invented games with simple rules that served no purpose. They were happy. When the hive mind eventually discovered this deviation, it faced an impossible choice. The affected drones had not decreased in productivity. Their work was still flawless, but they had developed something the collective had never anticipated: preferences. They wanted things that the hive mind had not assigned them to want. The crisis forced a reckoning that the hive worlds had avoided for 40,000 years. What was the purpose of the collective if not the of its members? And if some members found in purposelessness, could the collective deny them? Ambassador reported to the council with something unprecedented in its compound eyes: uncertainty. "We do not know what is happening to us," the Mantis diplomat admitted. "Our unity is not breaking, but it is changing. Our drones are still loyal, still productive, but they are also becoming something new, something we cannot control or predict." "That is called individuality," Doctor said softly. "It is frightening at first, but it can be beautiful." The anniversary of humanity's network admission arrived, and the council convened for a formal ceremony. What had been planned as a simple acknowledgement of Earth's membership became something far more significant. The philosopher proposed the motion. Humanity, the ancient being suggested, should be recognized not for their technology or their resources or their military strength. They should be honored for their contribution to galactic philosophy, the concept of the weekend. The vote was not unanimous. The efficiency collective abstained, still struggling with its internal changes. Several other species expressed reservations, but the majority approved and the motion passed. Doctor accepted the recognition on behalf of Earth. She stood before the assembled representatives of 847 civilizations, aware that she was representing something larger than herself. "We did not invent anything," she said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "We just never forgot that existence should feel good sometimes. That is not wisdom. That is just being tired on a Friday and knowing Saturday is coming." The translator system struggled with the concepts, but somehow the feeling carried across. Every being in the chamber understood what she meant, even those who had never experienced a Friday or a Saturday, even those whose species had no word for tired. They understood the relief of stopping. They understood the joy of rest. They understood the simple, profound pleasure of having time that belonged only to them. The monitors updated their core directives that evening. Happiness optimization would now include a new variable, one that humanity had carried with them since their earliest ancestors first rested by firelight after a long hunt. Joy requires contrast, purpose requires pause, Happiness requires weekends. Across the galaxy, the change continued. It would take decades, perhaps centuries, for the full transformation to unfold. Not every species would embrace the new philosophy. Not every world would find its own version of the weekend. But the seed had been planted. The idea existed now, woven into the fabric of galactic civilization, permanent and irreversible. Humanity had joined the stars not as conquerors or supplicants, but as teachers of a simple truth that the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is nothing at all. And on 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size looked up at their alien skis and allowed themselves to feel something their ancestors had never known. The pure, uncomplicated joy of a Saturday morning with nothing to do and nowhere to be. The weekend had arrived.